Hello, everyone. Welcome to Intro to Design Part 2, second of a three-part series about the intro to design and practice. My name is McKay Adams. I am a product design manager at Jack Henry. Over the last 5 years, I've been working in the fintech industry. I worked closely with these organizations here, mostly in a research capacity, which had a profound impact on me and my perspective on design, and we'll get more into that. I do have 16 years experience in the industry, really a variety of teams, organizations, small startups, large corporations, and all of that has really gone into influence this presentation and my perspective. All right, like I mentioned, this is a three-part series. Last time we talked about the design process kind of in theory. Today, we're going to talk about design in practice, what it's like in the real world. And then the third part goes over reconciling those two and finding success in your career. Okay. I think you may have guessed by now that there are obstacles to executing the design process in the real world. When you get out there, you'll find lots of different challenges and obstacles. I've identified three that have kind of provided the largest obstacles for me personally. So I wanted to go over those today. They are what I'm calling functional limitations first, second, departmental imbalance, and then third, gravity of revenue. So those may not make sense now, but we'll go over them. All right. So if we go back to kind of what we discussed in the first series and the definition of design and process, you know that designers solve problems, and the main objective is to get from the problem state on the left to a solution state on the right. Well, it just so happens that product teams have two main functions. According to Marty Kagan, they are figuring out what to build and how to build it. Okay. So this lines up nicely with kind of the diagram we saw before. A problem, what should we build? What are we trying to solve? And then how do we solve it? So now what I have found typically is the engineering roles satisfy the second function. How do we build it? Well, engineers build stuff. They'll determine how to build it, and that's appropriate. And then it's the product folks, business folks, sometimes sales folks that satisfy the first function of what should we build. And a lot of times what happens is what happened with Apple. Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, 4 years before they started Apple computers, Wozniak, kind of for fun, built what he called a blue box, a little device that let them bypass long distance fees from their phone carrier. Well, he thought he just built it for fun. He heard it was possible. He built it and was kind of amused by it. When he showed it to his friend Steve, the Jobs, who was an opportunist, said, "You know what? We can sell this." And so they did. They sold anywhere from 40 to 100 of these boxes for $170 a piece back in 1973 or 74. And that's what gave them a taste for a business venture. And they both admitted that if this hadn't happened, Apple computers probably would have never started. So in my experience going into a startup, many times the founder is an engineer who created something that happened to be valuable, and another person came along and said, "Hey, I can sell that." So you got these two functions covered. Engineers to build it, product business folks saying, "Okay, we'll sell it and we'll tell you what to build next." So along comes a designer, and where does a designer fit in this two function paradigm? Well, more often than not, the designer is placed on within the second function with the engineer. Design, you go help engineers build this thing, make it look nice, make it work decent. Well, that's fine. That's part of the job, and that's certainly what we do, but it's not all we do, right? If we go back to the design process, the 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 phases actually span both functions. Observation, the entire observation phase lies within the problem space of what should we build, and part of the exploration phase as well. It's really only the execution phase that fits solely within the second function. So what happens when you try and um, fit, let me move over here, fit the process into the function that you're placed? It doesn't work. It doesn't really work well. And so that may be the number one thing that I hear from new designers is where is the research? Like we were taught to do research. Where do we do that? Well, it's not really accounted for. That's the function problem. The full breadth and power of the design process is often not given sufficient time and space to function. You're hired and placed to perform a second function, which does not include talking to customers, understanding the problem. Basically, that's already been decided. So that creates problems once you release the product and you learn things that ways to possibly make it better, but the feedback mechanism there isn't there. It's not part of the function. Ideally, designers would like to operate in both functions, but it's difficult to kind of fit three pegs into two squares or two holes. All right. Next is the imbalance, company departmental imbalance. So what do I mean by that? All right, we have the two main imbalances that I found are sales driven or engineering driven organizations. I'm sure there's others, but these seem to be more prevalent in my experience. So what you have is one of these departments is more vocal or just more influential than the other, and so they are determining what is being built. On sales, sales-driven organizations just build whatever the customers ask them to in order to get a sale. Engineering-driven is engineers just decide whatever they want to build, sometimes maybe just for the interest of building or new language, new technology, as that's what they're going to build. So the drawbacks to both of these, when you ask customers what they want, and in order to make a sale, you run the risk of building yourself into a corner or having just too many features where it becomes less valuable and unusable. Also, customers have infinite incremental improvement requests from a limited perspective. So there's no end game for them. There's no like final vision or direction. They're just like, add this feature, add this feature, add this feature, and they don't care, where you end up. If it becomes unusable, they drop you, find someone else. In fact, that's the theory of business disruption, innovation disruption. Also, this is very sales driven, can feel very unstable when the direction of the company or the product is determined by customer requests. You have no real sense of where you're going, and things change very quickly. Like, well, I thought we were doing this, and I thought we were going to do A, we weren't going to do B. Well, one of our biggest customers came in, said they would pay a lot more for B. So we're not doing A, we're switching, we're going to do B. And you get a whiplash approach where you're just going, chasing the biggest wallet for the newest features. Engineering driven, there's some drawbacks as well. One of them is illustrated in that little animation there. Sometimes good engineering is finding the best way to build something many times. Sometimes that comes at the expense of the customer or the user. It may not even be like malicious or intended. It just happens to be cause strain on the user. So one of the risks you run by an engineering-driven organization is technical complexity that's passed on to the user, and usability and the value of the product goes down. You also could run into heavy technical costs of implementing of new technologies or switching technologies, and long development times, which slow down estimates and deliverability. So there's some issues there. So that's what I refer to as departmental imbalance that can lead to misguided requirements and uncertain direction. All right, for the third final obstacle, I'm going to do a quick detour into systems thinking to help us kind of understand what's going on. This is essential to understand the forces that are going on. So I talk more about this in another presentation, but really quickly, my favorite example for systems is think of a Tupperware collection. This is a system, right? A series of Tupperware containers of various sizes work together as a system. And in isolation like this, they all work very well. But the reality is that Tupperwares don't live in isolation. They live in a larger system, which is the drawer, the cabinet, the cupboard. And when viewed in this higher level system, many solutions are not as adequate. And you can even go up another system level and say cupboard, drawer, cabinet systems live within the kitchen system. And so do Tupperware. They're not just in the cupboard. Sometimes they're in the microwave. Sometimes they go from the microwave to the refrigerator. Sometimes they go from the dishwasher to the cabinet. So they really should be observed from the kitchen level system and not in isolation. So that's an example, a quick example of system thinking. And Don Norman, who I briefly mentioned last time, is famous for saying everything is a system. And advanced designers with experience learn and are very good at identifying systems, patterns, reframing problems to incorporate systems, and different things like that. So that is kind of what we're going to get into now. So let's look at the organizational system that you work in. So we start with you. Of course, you work for a company and you're a designer, but you also are part of a team. So this is the first system. You and your team have processes, language, culture that help you operate as a team. But your team is also part of a department, which is made up of lots of teams. And departments are their own system and have their own processes, culture, language, etc. Finally, your organization is made up of probably more than one department, usually at least 2 or 3. And each one of those departments has a system or has their own processes, culture, language, etc. So a lot of times, the way that your organization is organized by department does not directly reflect the customer is sometimes contrary to what how the customer experiences your products, and that can cause some obstacles. Um, Another example, again, back to the automotive industry, Bob Moesta had an internship at, pretty sure it was Ford. He didn't say Ford, but I'm pretty sure it was the Ford group in the 80s. And they ran into a problem where they were still operating on the assembly line silo model, right? They had engine people or on a team building the best engine. They had the transmission people separate from them in their own department building the best transmission, and so on for each section of the car. And what they found was everyone made really good individual parts, but when they came together and tried to assemble it, it was not working. They did not work well together. And that's because they were in separate departments working in silos. There was not any communication. And this is where they brought in a consultant from Japan that helped them kind of modify the way that they were doing things, like they were doing in Japan and Toyota, where there was a lot of cross communication, cross collaboration in order to create the best whole product. So this is a challenge. But that's only part of it, because the business is made up of your organization, of course, but the business is also part of the economy. So if we zoom way out, probably the top level, the economy has an impact on the business that cascades down to the organization and ultimately you. Now, this may be way more than you bargained for, but I think it's important to cover the basics here to show how this has an impact on you. On the left, we have businesses that produce goods and services to sell to households or consumers. So on the top, you have businesses here creating outputs, goods and services to the consumers who then pay for those goods and services back into the business. On the bottom half, consumers and households go to work at these businesses by giving them labor or sometimes capital. And then in exchange for this, businesses give them income. This income is what they use to spend goods and services from other businesses. And it's a cycle. It's called the circular flow of money. And so if you work in the US economy, this is your business is part of this system and relies on this circular flow of money. If you were to remove any piece of this, then the thing collapses. It doesn't work. Also, no one tells the businesses what to make. They have to figure out on their own what are consumers willing to pay for that will cover our costs and more. So a lot of times, this is why I think sometimes B2B design work is easier than B2C work. Like we mentioned, businesses are formulaic, very like consistency, don't like risk. So a lot of times they're very practical and very clear about what they need. Consumers, on the other hand, we'll talk more about this, are not as rational as we'd all like to believe. There's lots of factors that go into consumer buying habits, social, emotional, those types of factors. So lack of demand or product market fit continues to be a top reason startups fail. I didn't pull any specific stats on this because there's tons out there, and it's been like this my whole career. Number one reason businesses over here say they go out of business because there was not enough demand. People didn't buy what they were selling, or in other words, they solved a problem that didn't exist. so that nobody wanted to buy it. So what happens if nobody buys your product? You go extinct, you disappear as a business. So that's why revenue becomes increasingly important. Most business decisions, especially what to build, are considered on likelihood to generate revenue. So this is the gravity of revenue problem. It's hard to predict what will make money. Usually short-term solutions are easier to predict. Long-term solutions are harder to rationalize. So a lot of decisions that your company makes on what to build will be based on likelihood to generate revenue. And that's not always the best solution for the customer. Really interesting quote on economics from Charles Whelan. Economics starts with one very important assumption. Individuals act to make themselves as well off as possible. Individuals seek to maximize their own utility, which is a similar concept to happiness, only broader. So this is very interesting that economics uses the term utility when we talked about design being a utility, only they have a very broad definition of that. Whatever will make people better off, what will improve their well-being, what things that will make them happier, that's what people will seek to obtain and people are willing to pay for, right? So that's the assumption in economics, is that if you can find what people want to improve their well-being, they're willing to pay for that, and that'll keep the circular flow of money going. All right. Okay, so you may have realized that most of the issues that come up revolve around deciding what to build. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit more about that, why that might be. Probably the number one reason is assumptions. The first being, this is the split. Normally I've split this evenly in half, what to build, how do we build it. But in reality, if you broke this up by energy or effort, I would say 80 to 90% of a company's energy or efforts are spent on building something. Again, businesses are formulaic. They like consistency, processes, and it's easy to document and process the building portion. And that's what majority of what people do are documenting, processing, building the process. I would say 10, maybe 20% of a company's energy and effort is spent on what should we build. And that is harder to do. It's harder to come up. It's harder than it seems to come up with the right thing to build. And that's what I want to talk about, why that might be. Peter Drucker, famous business mind from the mid 20th century. What does the customer value may be the most important question, yet is the one least often asked. I'm still amazed by this. Even when I started, it's like no one is asking what the customer values, or no one can tell me what the customer values or wants. Jim Kalbach says, it's because traditional businesses believe they can create solutions that customers will truly value without their input. Same, Indy Young recognized the same thing. In the tech world, companies are eager to fix things and make progress without first understanding the problem deeply. Remember our observation phase. More attention needs to be paid to the problem, especially through the lens of people experiencing it. Remember our two functions. There's no room for observation. It's not accounted for in a two-function business. This may be the biggest reason. It is impossible for someone to learn what they think they already know. There's a small group of leaders or influential people in an organization that have the strong enough opinion on what needs to be built, and they don't validate that. Why would you validate something you know you're right about, right? And so that's what's happening is there's a small group or maybe even a handful of influential individuals that are think they know what to build and are telling the company what to build. You have to remember that no facts exist inside the building, only opinions. These requirements and these directives come down as facts, but if there's no evidence, they're only opinions. The evidence exists outside the building. So the overall message here is that your own organization may be your greatest obstacle in reaching the full potential of design. That's a little maybe cynical or depressing, but in my experience, that happens to be definitely true. As Jared Spool said it, your organization is perfectly optimized to produce the experience it currently delivers. You could say user experience or design or product it currently delivers. That's what businesses do. They crank out products or services. Then they don't like to change. They're really good at consistency and creating what they are creating today. The good news is there is a way to overcome this. There's the second part of Jared Spool's message here that I will talk about in the third part. So don't get too discouraged or feel down. There is a way through this. It involves kind of redefining the role of design, redefining how you see success as a designer, and finding ways to implement change internally and externally with your product. So that's the third and final part. Stay tuned for that. And thanks for watching.